Welcome to The Way the World Works, where the trusted team behind the Tuttle Twins books tackles current events, hot topics, and fun ideas to help your family find clarity in a world full of confusion.
Hi, Connor.
Hey, Brittany.
So today I want to talk about the difference between what we call punishment and natural consequences. But before we get started, I want to point out that every family runs their house differently and there are rules. And anytime we talk about these discussions, I don't want anyone to think that I'm telling children to not listen to their parents or respect whatever rules the household has decided on. So this is just an interesting conversation that actually to me was more about what I learned as a teacher. So Connor, I want to start by asking you because I know you tend to be a little bit more like free range style with your kids, right?
A little bit, yeah, in some respects.
So I'm assuming you guys still have some sort of rules or at least kind of structure that you and your wife have put in place just to make sure things run smoothly, right?
For
Is
sure.
that
Yeah,
correct? Okay.
yeah.
So when one of your kids breaks the rules, what happens? How is that situation handled?
Um, I'll be very specific. This morning, my one of my children, I won't say. I was about to say whether it was
Uh-oh.
the daughter or the son. So this particular child, well, both of them listen to the podcast, so they'll be hearing this. So yeah, my child was listening to or watching TV when that was not supposed to be happening early in the morning when this child was supposed to be getting ready for the day and getting stuff done. And so my wife came back and found this child watching TV, and so clearly, like we're going to have consequences for that because we think it's important to be a person of your word, and if you say you're going to do something or not going to do something, that you stick to that, and that didn't happen in this case. And we kind of have a saying in our house, you do the things that you need to do before the things that you want to do. And so it's, hey, let's go get the stuff done that we're supposed to and check off everything on the list, and then we have free time and we can go spend it how we
Mhm.
want. And a lot of times, my children, like most children, will struggle with that because they just want to do what they want and not what's expected of them or what's best for them or what they've committed to. And so we're trying to teach them, like, no, you got to stick with your commitments. You got to do what's important for you long term and not just the instant gratification of watching some TV or doing whatever you want.
And I really like that because the way you explain that is your kids understand why the rule is in place. They know what it is and what it's supposed to help with. Now let's talk about like school, or I know my parents weren't always great at this, but teachers especially, I think a lot of times, at least when I was a kid, you hear a lot of this like do this or else. Like you're going to get punished if you don't do this, and that's the end of it. And you're kind of just you don't do it out of fear. I don't know if you felt that way in school, but there were a lot of things I didn't do just because I was so scared of getting in trouble, but I didn't understand why that was something I wasn't supposed to do. Where your kids know, like, okay, it's because we have things to get done, that there are things to do before we watch TV. And that's why the
Mhm.
rule is in place. So I think knowing the why their rules are really important. And so just to give you an example, because the why can help you understand what's going to happen. So,
Right.
for example, one thing that drove me nuts as a teacher is that kids are constantly tipping their chairs back. Do you know what I'm talking about? Where
Oh, yeah.
they
Oh,
like
yeah.
lean back and as a teacher, I'm up there, I'm like, "All right, I know this kid is gonna fall back eventually." And at the school I taught at, we had a rule where we didn't use the word punish, not in like a weird hippie way. But that's because we had like contracts with each student. And so before they started the beginning of the year, we had certain things that they promised to do that we promised to do. And one of them is, safety of the class or whatever. But as far as tipping chairs back, that was something we weren't actually supposed to say, like, "Oh, you're doing this. Stop tipping your chair. Stop tipping your chair." Plus, if I did that, I wouldn't have been able to get anything done because literally, I don't know what it is with 8-year-old children, you guys, but you guys love tipping your chairs back, and it drove me nuts because I was so paranoid that somebody was going to hurt their head. But so, why would there be a rule for that? That makes sense, right? Don't tip your chair back. We don't want you to get hurt. So the way this school worked is we had a big focus on natural consequences. So, what is the best way for someone to learn not to tip their chair back, Connor?
To fall backwards
To
and,
fall
hit
backwards.
their head on something really hard.
And hopefully not so
Not
bad where it's
too
really
hard.
bad, but
Right.
yeah, but so that's where the natural consequences come in. So what I mean, but when I say that is that even if there were no rules in place, even if I didn't have a rule, don't tip your chair in class, there is something natural, a natural reaction that would happen to you doing that. So another thing we did, and this is going to sound a little tough, and I'm not saying I agreed with everything, but it was effective. If it was cold outside and you forgot to take your jacket out to recess, you were not allowed to come back in and get your jacket, which again, I understand, little weird, but guess what? You never forgot your jacket twice.
Oh yeah.
So there were these things where it was about natural consequences, right? Nobody was going to yell at you or punish you just because it was I said so, right? There was a part of it where it was like, okay, this is a natural consequence of something that has happened. So I don't know. Does that make sense in context to you, Connor?
I think it does to me, and maybe a step further from that. Sometimes kids have a little rebellious streak in them, and so if they're told not to tip their chairs back, for example, then they're going to want to do it even more, right?
Oh,
It's like when you
yes. I
tell
had
someone,
those
"Don't
students.
don't look inside that box." Well, they want to look inside the box now because you told
Hmm.
them not to. So we have to, especially for parents when we're raising kids, but for the kids themselves, it's like we have to get the kids to the point where they're doing the right things because they want to and they know it's the right thing. But sometimes that does require falling back and hitting your head. It does require opening that box and I don't know, there's a snake inside that bites you. Who knows? You
Oof,
know,
I hope not.
or touching the, the hot stove or whatever it is. There's just some things about life I feel like that you're just going to have the experience because then, the kids are going to have the motivation themselves to say, "Oh yeah, I don't want to do that." And yeah, my mom was telling me or my dad was telling me, but now I clearly don't want to have that happen again. Like, one of my kids got really sunburn and was, peeling all over the place and everything. And, and that's not a pleasant experience. It itches, it looks weird, you're sloughing skin everywhere. And that experience, I think serves as a learning opportunity to say, oh, let's make sure that doesn't happen again and try and remember to put sunscreen on. So, as parents, we can't just helicopter around our children and hover over them at all times and make sure that they're always wearing their jacket and never tipping their chair back. And, got to let them make mistakes and get bruises and learn along the way. And for the kids, like, hopefully you don't do that too often. It's not that you should learn everything yourself all the time, and directly, run into every problem in life just so that you can personally experience it. That would be silly. Which is why I think listening generally, speaking, listening to the people in your life who you trust and love, is going to be, the right thing for you to avoid some of those pitfalls.
Yeah, and it's not just, I used pretty severe examples, but there's some other examples too. So for example, another thing we did at my school is nobody was forced to share their toys or whatever it was they brought to school because it was very big on property rights. And but one thing that I thought is interesting is let's say you're somebody who doesn't ever want to share, because remember, sharing's not bad as long as it is voluntary, right? That's why we talk about voluntary charity. That's why we talk about things like that. What's wrong is when it's forced. But it's interesting because if a kid decides that they never want to share, they don't want to play nicely with others or exclude others, you're going to find that nobody wants to play with you. And that was always one of the most effective natural consequences I ever saw. Like, it doesn't do me any good to make a kid share as a teacher, one, because I don't believe they should have to if it's their own property, but two, it just doesn't do any good because then they're only sharing because they have to. Right.
Mm.
But it was interesting when you see a kid who maybe won't share, but is also just kind of mean in general. Nobody wants to play with that kid anymore, and that's kind of a natural consequence of that. I had a friend tell me that her niece is driving her crazy right now because she just throws tantrums all the time, that nobody wants to hang out with her. And she's like, and even more than like timeout doesn't work, none of that works. What works is when no one hangs out with her, like when they just kind of feel like, all right, nobody wants to be around you right now. That was the most productive way of handling that. So I don't know if you've ever witnessed anything like that, but that's something that I always think is interesting, is that there's these natural consequences to how we act to others as well.
Well, when we did our teen books, when we started coming out with them a few years back for the fiction books, I uh I wanted to, because I had read when I was young, I had read the Choose Your Own Adventure
Yes, we
books that
love
were
those.
really
Yeah.
popular in the 1980s and the 90s, and those were fun. It was like, if you want to go into the cave, turn to page 73. If you want to run away, turn to page 100 or whatever. And they were just fun, silly little stories, but they were little adventures, and they were cool. So when we started doing this book, or this series of books for Tuttle Twins, I was trying to think through like, okay, let's use the same format, because I think a lot of people really like that format where you can, decide which way you want the story to go. We obviously can't call it choose your own adventure for copyright reasons. And so we were thinking like what are what other titles, or what could we call this? And so what quickly bubbled up in my mind was choose your consequence, which is what the name of these books are, the Choose Your Own Consequence series. And I think that has a lot of powerful kind of concepts tied into it for reasons, Brittany, that you were just saying. That, for example, when we're reading this story and the Tuttle twins have to like go on this adventure and face this big decision, should they, lie to their parents, or should they admit, that they did something wrong and tell the truth? And so there's two paths here that you can go down, right? You can decide to just own up to your mistake and confess or whatever and tell the truth, or you can bury it down deep and mislead your parents and lie and try and move on and save that pain for another day. And these are decisions that we face all the time, and they each have consequences. I mean, the consequence of owning up to your mistake and telling the truth, you might get disciplined for whatever that bad thing was or whatnot, but your parents are going to be very appreciative that you owned up to it, that you told them about it, that you communicated, that you didn't try and mislead them. And so that's a positive consequence. You're going to regain or rebuild trust. You're going to maybe shorten or decrease the punishment that you would have gotten, you know. Whereas if you decide to mislead and bury it down deep, then I think the consequences are going to be much worse. Perhaps, not in the short term. Maybe in the short term you avoid punishment, but you're just building up this longer term negative consequence that when your parents find out that you lied to them and that you've been lying to them, right, it's going to be a much worse punishment. So everything has consequences. We kind of use the term consequence in a negative way, I think,
Hmm.
in a lot of cases, but there's positive consequences too. It's just, what are the results of your decisions? And every action, every choice, every decision you make is going to have some type of effect. It's going to have an outcome. It's going to have a consequence. And so to me, life is really about learning how to have the best consequences from our decisions. Like, I want to be healthy and I want to have energy and I want my family to be, loved and supported. And I want to make an impact on the world, and I want to be able to provide for my family. And so I have to make choices in a way that are going to lead to those outcomes. If I decide to, be unfaithful to my wife, or abandon my children, or quit my job and be a homeless bum, or, play video games all day long because it's selfishly what I want to do, then there will be consequences to that decision, and or those decisions, plural. And those will be significant consequences, but they're very real, and so we all have them throughout our life. Whatever you're deciding, it's really just this question of like, are these decisions that I'm making today, maybe it's, am I going to talk back to my parents, or am I going to speak kindly, or am I going to actually clean my room, or am I going to just sweep it all under the bed? Or, am I going to eat the junk food, or am I going to eat a piece of fruit? And all these little decisions add up and create consequences in our life. And so I think the earlier we learn that lesson, then hopefully we're not having to get punished by other people for doing wrong. We can start to learn ourselves, like, hey, I want positive consequences, so let's do some positive behavior.
Yeah, no, I think that's absolutely right. And I like that you said consequences aren't always bad, right? So when we think of natural consequences, again, we talked a couple episodes ago about changing your mindset. Sometimes you can do actions that lead to a positive change in a mindset, positive consequences. So yeah, I think it's really important to recognize that there are natural consequences to pretty literally everything we do. So yeah,
Literally everything. Well,
literally.
guys, head to TuttleTwins.com/podcast. You can check out past episodes if you've missed. Make sure to subscribe. If you haven't yet, tell a family, tell a friend, let them know about the podcast too. Thanks for listening. Brittany, great chatting with you as always. And until next time, we'll talk to you later.
Talk to you later.
You've been listening to The Way the World Works. Make sure your family is subscribed and check out TuttleTwins.com for more awesome content.